All right, you've made it to our third and final video on the Odyssey. And this is the one that's going to be most helpful for you in terms of preparing for your essay. What I'm going to try to do in this video is give you some ideas for some possibilities of what you might want to do with the essay, but leave you still with the work of trying to figure out how you would want to support your arguments in your essay. So what I want to talk about in this video then is what the Odyssey tells us about early Greek culture. Lots of great reasons to read literature, but one of them is that literature really gives us a privileged window into the mindset of a culture, the values of a culture, what a culture values, what it doesn't value. And of course, in the case of reading a book this old, it's inevitable that the values of Homer and of the entire Greek people that is very different from our own. And that can be very eye-opening. Just as if you ever travel internationally, and if you've lived in Tennessee most of your life, and you go on a mission trip somewhere, or you visit some country halfway across the world, you visit Thailand, let's say, definitely you're going to learn a lot about Thai culture, but you're also at the same time going to learn a lot about your own, in this case, Southern American culture. Oh, I guess, this is something distinctive to my culture. Not all cultures see things this way, or not all cultures do things this way. So it can be a really eye-opening experience, and I think one well worth having. I believe in Dr. Edmondson's lecture, which either you've watched or you will watch, one of the things that he focuses on, or at least discusses, when talking about an epic, what an epic is the fact that an epic, really by definition, is not just an expression of the personal values of the author, whoever he or she might be, but epics really purport to reflect the values, the cultural values of an entire culture. So we don't read the Odyssey simply to see how Homer saw the world. We read the Odyssey to find out how the ancient Greeks in general saw the world. So it's something well worth paying attention to. Let me just give you one example. I'm going to move into the cultural values in just a moment. But let me focus on an example of something we learn about early Greek culture by reading the Odyssey. The Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are the earliest evidence that we possess about ancient Greek religion. So if you're interested in how the ancient Greeks thought about the gods, how they worshiped them, how they expressed their devotion to the gods, the Homeric epics, including the Odyssey, of course, are the first place that you want to look. And it's very interesting to see how the gods are depicted in the Odyssey. For one thing, of course, and this is obvious from the opening pages of the book, is that the gods are not sort of lurking off stage, occasionally making a cameo. No, the gods are intimately involved with the action of the story. The plot is totally dependent on the gods acting in certain ways. This is true of the Iliad as well, by the way, in case you haven't read that. So the gods are very, very important, and the gods are just in some ways just as important characters as the human characters are, right? Especially Athena and Poseidon, but there are others as well. Of course, what we're most interested in is how the gods are characterized. What kinds of gods are these? And are they the way we would imagine a god to be? I think the first thing that needs to be said about the Homeric depiction of the Greek gods is that the gods are extremely, and this is a $3 word I'm about to throw at you, extremely anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic, I'll spell that ANTHROPOMORPHIC. Anthropo, that means human, morphic, coming from the Greek word for form or shape. In other words, the gods are depicted basically in human form. Not only do they seem to have bodies that are human-like in some ways, although certainly not in others, but I think that's what's most striking is that they are very much like human beings in the fact that they are highly emotional. They have biases and prejudices against people that aren't always totally rational. If you think about the reason why Poseidon hates Odysseus or why Athena loves and protects Odysseus, the reasons aren't always, they may be understandable in some way, but they're not perfectly rational either. And certainly, I think you get a sense reading this literature that the Greek gods are not really morally superior to human beings, certainly not to the best of human beings. And the classic case from the Odyssey is the song that the Phaeacian bard named Demodocus, you don't, well, maybe you do need to know his name. I think his name might be on the study guide, actually. I'd have to double check. Demodocus, Demodocus. He's the bard of the Phaeacians, and he tells this story, sings this song. Stories were sung in ancient Greece. Tells a story about Ares and Aphrodite. Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you because you're going to be reading it. But suffice it to say that Ares and Aphrodite do not, especially Aphrodite, but Ares as well, and well, yeah, both of them really, don't come off looking very good. You know, gods are not gods because they live according to a higher standard of morality. I think as Christians we find that odd, but the Greeks just sort of took it for granted. What makes the gods gods is not their superior morality. What makes the gods gods is really their immortality. Okay? They are immortal. Yes, they have some superpowers that human beings don't have, but those 2 points aside, they behave much like human beings. So that's something that we learn about Greek culture by reading Homer. We learn about the way the Greek people saw their divinities. Now, I want to talk about some cultural values. I'm going to talk about 4 of them, mention 4 of them. Any of these 4 would be fair game for your essay. Your essay asks you to talk about 3 cultural values. And I would not say that the 4 that I'm about to mention are the only possibilities, but I think they're all strong possibilities. Okay. Number 1, heroism. Odysseus is, of course, the epic hero of the Odyssey, and he represents a particular kind of heroic ideal. And to a lesser extent, Telemachus does as well. I mean, that's part of the point of the Odyssey, is by the end of it, Telemachus has, in a sense, become another Odysseus. So part of what this epic is celebrating is this kind of heroic ideal. If you were a Greek man, I'll say more on the gender thing in a moment. If you're a Greek man, Odysseus is the kind of person you would aspire to be. So if you wanted to talk about this in your essay, you would want to talk about some of the specific qualities, heroic qualities that Odysseus embodies. Some of those have been mentioned in previous videos, but I think there are many possibilities there. So what kind of hero is he? What makes him a hero? And so on. One thing I think that is worth looking at, especially thinking about the question, sort of what makes him a hero. I think it's worth reflecting on a couple refusals that Odysseus makes in the course of this story. There are a couple of times when he is made a pretty attractive offer that he turns down. One example is near the beginning of the book, Calypso's island. Calypso, who is a kind of minor deity herself, Calypso offers to, if Odysseus will only stay with her, she will make him immortal. She will make him basically a god. And he turns it down. He would rather leave and at least try to return home. Of course, there was no guarantee that he would return home. So it's pretty stunning in a way that he would turn that down. Then a bit later, he winds up on the island of the Phaeacians and encounters the beautiful Nausicaa, who is beautiful and well-mannered and has, royal parents and is the total package in some ways. And her father offers her to Odysseus in marriage. And again, he turns it down. So how do we make sense of this? What does this tell us about Odysseus? And what does it tell us about how the Greeks thought about what it meant to be a hero? Well, one thing that Calypso's island and the island of the Phaeacians have in common is that they're not quite human places. They are really otherworldly kinds of places, places that are literally not on the map. Okay, so if you ever are in the Mediterranean region and you want to go visit Calypso's island, good luck with that. Same with the island of the Phaeacians, Scheria. But it's not just that they're fictional places. The way they're described, they're not described as human places. In many ways, Calypso's island is extremely alluring. You've got Calypso herself. She's beautiful, never-ending supply of food and drink and leisure. And in many ways, the island of the Phaeacians is similar. Now, it's more human because at least you have a society. Of course, there's no society, no community at all on Calypso's island. There is that on Scheria, but nobody really works. People just sort of party and play games, and everybody lives in harmony, and it's just not quite human. And so what I'm trying to say is that both of these places are no place for a hero. Because what is a hero and what makes someone a hero? A hero is someone who struggles, someone who comes up against obstacles, someone who faces adversity in some form and overcomes it. Right? There is no adversity to overcome on Calypso's island or the island of the Phaeacians. There are no opportunities to display his signature qualities like wit and cunning, or even self-control and patient endurance. These are other qualities of Odysseus. No, those qualities can only really shine forth in struggle. And there's just no struggle to be found. So these are not places for heroes. There's another place that Odysseus visits. This is also a sort of miserable place for heroes. And interestingly, that place is Hades, the underworld. Now, when you get there, you'll see that one of the people he encounters in the underworld is none other than Achilles, famous Greek warrior, hero of the Iliad. And he sees Achilles looking as ripped and impressive as ever. And he goes to talk, Odysseus goes to talk to him, and Odysseus is trying to, sort of make Achilles feel better for being, dead. And Achilles says, look, I would rather be the slave of a dirt farmer on earth than the king of the underworld, the king of Hades. Now, again, why is that? Well, that's because even if you're in a miserable position, if you're on earth, if you're in the real human world, you have the opportunity to prove yourself, the opportunity to face challenges and triumph and prevail. You don't have that in Hades because nothing's happening. There's no drama. There's no hardship. And that's also true of the islands that we've been talking about too. I said I'd come back to the gender thing for a moment. I do want to point out that in the Greek way of thinking of things, only men can possibly qualify as heroes. Now, if you think about the Odyssey, the character of Penelope is obviously a highly admirable character. And in many ways, a match made in heaven for Odysseus, right? Because she's got his wit, she's got his patience, and so on. So she's a very admirable character. I think we're supposed to have hold her in very high regard. And yet, she's a woman. And so for the entirety of the story, she never leaves the house and only on occasion leaves her bedroom. Now, if that is your domain, you cannot possibly be a hero, because what does the hero do? The hero makes a name for himself by performing some public feat or feats, which was simply just out of the question for Greek women in that culture. So that also tells us something about Greek culture and gender dynamics. Okay, so I've talked about the heroic ideal as one possible cultural value. Another, and I think this one will be very obvious to you, it's hard to miss, and that is hospitality. I mean, you don't have to read too far into the Odyssey before you realize, okay, in this world, in this culture, hospitality was a huge deal. Now, if you were to write about this, you would definitely want to talk about, first of all, what hospitality even was in the ancient Greek world, right? It's not just letting somebody in your home and offering them a glass of sweet tea. It obviously entails much more than that. So what does good hospitality look like? And then, of course, and you have so much to draw from by the time you get to the end of the Odyssey. What are some examples of good hospitality? And what are some examples of really bad hospitality, of failures to fulfill the responsibilities of host or guest in some cases? And then finally, you would want to talk about why the Greeks would put such a high premium on hospitality. I mean, we certainly don't in our modern Western culture, right? Our hospitality industry is the hotel industry, right? Where if you pay $100 a night, you get to stay in a little box and have some, soggy waffles for breakfast. We don't value hospitality in the same way. So that raises the question, why was it such a big deal for the Greeks? And I think there's a couple of things you can think of. You have to use your imagination a bit. One reason that is explicitly discussed in the Odyssey is one I want you to look for. It's a religious rationale. So it's possible to see hospitality, the offering of hospitality, as a kind of religious act in ancient Greece. So be looking for that. And that brings me to my third cultural value, and that is honoring the gods. I've already talked a little bit about how the gods are depicted in the Odyssey. I want to talk about the other side of the coin, not the gods themselves, but how human beings were expected to interact with the gods in the Odyssey. What is it? So, in other words, what does it mean to be religious in ancient Greece? I think, without a doubt, the message, or one message of the Odyssey, is it's important to give the gods their due. But the question is, what is the gods' due? What did people owe to the gods? Were people expected to love the gods? Were people expected to wake up early and have daily devotionals, or something like that? Right? So, to put it very simply, based on your reading of the Odyssey, what did religion consist of? What did it even mean to be religious? How do you express your respect or honor for the gods? And what is religion for? Why be religious at all? Is it so you can have some happy afterlife? Is it simply because it's a duty and that's it? Is it because it gives you a warm and tingly feeling inside whenever you honor the gods? Why? Why honor the gods? So that's a question that I think you can address on the basis of the Odyssey. And again, what are you supposed to do? Because I will say this. Religion in the ancient world, and in ancient Greece in particular, was primarily a matter of action. Okay, so not, believing certain teachings, but doing certain things. So the question is, what are those things that people were expected to do? What do you need to do if you want to honor the gods, and so on? So be looking for that. I think in a lot of ways, we would not, you read through the Odyssey, you wouldn't necessarily describe Odysseus as a really holy or pious person. But Odysseus did recognize that the gods needed to be acknowledged and respected. So how did he go about doing that? And why was it important for him to do that? So this is just another good, apart from the essay, this is just a good opportunity for us to think about how the way we think about religion, our assumptions about religion, just don't match up with the ancient Greeks. I'm not saying that we think about religion entirely differently, but there are, I think, some significant differences there. Finally, one last cultural value that you might want to discuss is loyalty or fidelity. There are a number of admirable characters in this story, male and female, human and animal, and they are all characterized by loyalty. That's what makes them admirable characters. Odysseus, obviously, right? I just talked about the opportunities he turned down so that he might return to his home, to his wife, to his son, be loyal to them. But of course, there are other great examples of loyalty. So if you wanted to talk about this cultural value, I don't think it would be enough to talk just about Odysseus. You would want to talk about some of those other characters, including perhaps Argus the dog. And I don't want to spoil this moment in the story, but be looking for Argus the dog. All right. One thing to pay attention to, and this is, I think, going to be hard to miss, is the way that Homer uses foils to really emphasize the loyalty of the characters who stay loyal. And he does this not even so much by using characters that are a part of the story, but by referring to other stories that give examples of either infidelity, disloyalty, or great loyalty. And one of those stories that just keeps on cropping up again and again is the story of Agamemnon and his wife Clytemnestra. Agamemnon, of course, he's gone for 10 years, fighting in the Trojan War. It takes him a while to get home. Meanwhile, Clytemnestra, who's basically given up Agamemnon for dead, shacks up with this other guy, Aegisthus. And when Agamemnon does finally return home, he and Clytemnestra conspire together to have Agamemnon killed. So Clytemnestra is, that's Clytemnestra. I think that's right. So she's the great example of disloyalty. So the question early on is Penelope going to turn out to be another Clytemnestra? Or is she going to set a very different kind of example? Now, the postscript to that story is that Agamemnon had a son, Orestes, who was not present when Agamemnon was murdered, of course finds out about it, and then avenges his death. So Orestes is held up as this great example of loyalty, absolute loyalty. And so that's the question for Telemachus. Is Telemachus going to be another Orestes, which would be a great thing? That's Orestes. Or is he going to fail to live up to Orestes' sort of standard? So that's one way that Homer really stresses this theme of loyalty and disloyalty. Now, again, we asked this question when it came to hospitality, and in a way, when we were talking about religion a moment ago. Why is this value such a big deal? Why is loyalty so important? Well, I'm actually now going to loop back to the first cultural value I talked about, the heroic ideal. And remember what I said? I said that the heroic ideal is that the hero enters into a world of turmoil, of struggle, of hardship, and overcomes in some way. Right? So you have to embrace the human world. You can't escape from the realities of the world and then be a hero. No, you have to embrace the realities, even the very hard realities of the world. And so to be loyal, in a sense, to be loyal means that you can't have it all, which in a way is kind of what he was offered by the Phaeacians. Right? You can stay here. You have this beautiful young wife. You won't really have to work. You can just party and play games, and you can have it all. Right? And he turns it down. And I think that once you embrace that human world where you can't have it all, there are real limits to what you can have, you can better understand why loyalty was so important to Homer and the ancient Greeks. To stay loyal to Penelope, he's going to have to turn down the offer of Nausicaa, or Calypso's offer. Now, obviously, you'll notice that Odysseus is not perhaps as loyal as one might wish. Right? There are many rolls in the hay with Calypso before he leaves the island. But nonetheless, he does turn down her offer. And he does that to stay loyal to Penelope. Again, he could have stayed in any of these places, which in many ways are more attractive places than Ithaca. I mean, think about the suitors. The suitors, not all of them were Ithacans, but many of them were, and the suitors just are not attractive human beings. And yet he would rather return to that place. Right? So loyalty goes hand in hand with that heroic ideal where you recognize, you acknowledge that life is hard, you can't have it all, And one day you'll have to say goodbye to the world. And so to try to have it all, to try to live without commitment, right? Without pain, that's not human. That's not the human life. That's the life of the gods. The gods, they don't die. They sort of sleep around. They're not terribly loyal. I mean, again, Ares and Aphrodite. They roam from place to place. I mean, they party on Mount Olympus, but they also sort of go around wherever they want to go. That's fine for the gods, but not for human beings. Where human beings belong is in the world of pain and struggle and ordeal. A world in which you accept that you can't have it all, and that a life well lived is a life of loyalty. But loyalty means limitations. Odysseus maybe can be king of Ithaca, but that's it. Right? If he's going to return to Penelope, he has to leave Calypso and Nausicaa behind, and so on. So part, I think, of what the Odyssey is saying is that to be human, as opposed to divine, to be human is to make commitments. Commitments to other people and to places where you bind yourself, you limit yourself to those people and places. And the downside is, yes, there are real limitations. They are real limitations. If he's going to go home to Penelope, he's going to have to say goodbye to Nausicaa and Calypso. But those very limitations are precisely what make us human. And that's something to be celebrated. I think at the end of the day, the Odyssey is a celebration of being human. It's okay not to be a god. There's something beautiful about being human. There's something beautiful about loyalty, limiting yourself and saying, I'm sticking with this person, even though this person is going to get old and wrinkly and will one day die. My life is only worth living if I honor the commitments that I've made to those people. So I've given you 4 examples of cultural values that could possibly be discussed in an essay. Again, there are other possibilities, and I would encourage you, if you have something else you'd like to write about, another cultural value you'd like to write about, but you want to make sure that you're on the right track, please just communicate with me by email, and I can give you some guidance on that. Thanks.